We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! I'm Yuruzi. Here's part 3 of What If Naruto Studied Fuinjutsu. While exploring the Team 7 training ground, a young Naruto happens to stumble across a strangely shaped kunai embedded in a tree. Years of frustration and deciphering later, he finally cracks the Fuinjutsu formula hidden along the handle to surprising and painful results. At the same time, a ghost of the Otsutsuki sets in motion a plan to end his family's eternal conflict. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 11, Trial by Fire, Part 1. It never stopped amazing him how much Naruto could accomplish when he put his mind to it. Kakashi stood next to his other two charges as they watched the horde of Naruto's clones work. It was like staring into a sea of blonde hair and navy sleeves as they ran around the construction yard. They weren't the only ones enjoying the show. Workers who hadn't sustained major injuries were off in the shade laughing at the whole debacle. The clones had a pretty efficient plan set out. Multiple groups carried the enormous blocks of wood out from the storage house into the courtyard and organized them into blocks of 4 planks up and 5 across. The original was sitting at a table next to the piles as he worked on the necessary storage seals. To ensure that nothing happened to the storage scrolls, he was making sure to add special seals to prevent water and fire damage, just in case. When he completed a scroll, he would hand it off to a clone who'd walk over to the piles of lumber. With a few hand signs, the pile would disappear in a cloud of smoke as a new kanji appeared on the paper. He would take the scroll and carefully place it in a small metal box off to the side. The manager hovered over the original the entire time, entranced by the boy's actions. He was vigorously jotting things down on his own notepad and would occasionally interrupt the boy to ask a few questions, which he was delighted to answer. After a while, Kakashi waved over the manager. The bespectacled man jogged over with a big grin plastered on his face. "Are you sure I can't convince you to let me take him off your hands? He's a godsend. He's turning a 4 to 5 day job into something we'll have done by tonight." I was skeptical when Hiruzen said he had the perfect genin for the job, but this is spectacular. Kakashi could see the blonde blushing over the man's shoulder. He was rubbing the back of his head and couldn't stop a sincere smile from erupting on his face. He wasn't used to hearing such praise directed at him. "I'm sorry Kenta-san, but I'm afraid I'm going to decline on that. I'm sure it would alleviate some headaches in the village, but I just simply can't part with my precious student. Who is going to annoy Sasuke if he's absent?" Sasuke shot the Joun in a glare as the blonde boy giggled. Even Hinata seemed to smile, though she tried to fight it. Sasuke shot her a hurt glare and she couldn't suppress her giggle that time. "Anyways, I wanted to give you the heads up that I'm taking these two to do some patrols around the area. Since this is still a mission, I thought I'd take the time to practice some patrols." The manager nodded as Naruto yelled, "Hey, what about me? You seem to have your hands full. Or are you saying you'd rather be patrolling than showing off your Fuinjutsu?" The blonde couldn't argue with that, so instead he made a little pout before getting back to work. "Have fun Hinata-chan. I guess you two Sasuke team." The old man chuckled as the group in front of him turned and set off into the woods around the compound. He turned back around and said, "You really don't like to get along with him, do you?" The blonde shot up from his work, "Never. He's nothing but a major prick, who everyone loves to fawn over. Oh look at me. I'm all dark and brooding. I'm so mature and impressive," the blonde taunted before letting out his own mature raspberry. The old man nodded as he sat next to him at the table. "With good cause. As a civilian who stays out of the affairs of shinobi, even I know how impressive the Uchiha clan was. If they were really so great, why aren't they still around?" The blonde stopped and felt a little ashamed as he realized how rude that had sounded. The manager looked amazed. Even he knew what happened. "You really don't know?" he asked shocked. The blonde shook his head. "All I know is that they were taken down by one guy. No one in the village liked to talk about it. At school, Arika-sensei didn't want us to bother Sasuke about it. Not that the blonde didn't want to talk to him about it. Even though he and Sasuke had never been on the best terms, he had felt his heart stop when he had heard Sasuke had lost his family. He had become just like him. Alone. He had wanted to reach out, but their prides never let them do it. Instead, they formed an unspoken connection that neither would admit existed, even today. The old manager shook his head. That isn't a story for me to tell. That story is better coming from your sensei or Sasuke-san himself. He paused, as the blonde boy seemed to contemplate things. Now. Let's move on from such depressing matters. I do believe you were telling me something about these insurance seals as you call them. The blonde boy appreciated the gesture and began rattling off his ideas about seals. At the same time, his mind still lingered on the same question. How much did he really know about Sasuke? Shortly after Kakashi and the others had left, he stopped and turned to face them. Is there something wrong, sensei? Hinata asked. Yes, I didn't want to alarm Kenta-san, but we have a potential problem. Sasuke's back straightened as he gave Kakashi his undivided attention. Yesterday, as we were walking towards the complex, I thought I saw something in the woods. It wasn't until last night, when I went back to check, that I confirmed that there was someone there. So that's what he was doing last night, Sasuke thought. Someone tried very hard to cover their trail, which leads me to assume that we may be facing some trouble in the next day or two. Why didn't you inform the idiot about this? Sasuke asked, surprising Hinata, who had been thinking the same thing. He has his hands full as it is. Besides, he needs his full concentration on focusing on those seals. There can be some nasty problems if he makes a mistake. So, Hinata, I'm going to require the aid from your Byakugan as we search through the woods. Sasuke seemed a little agitated and asked, then why not leave me with the dope? What if the assailant decides to go after him? Is that concern for your other teammate? I'm so glad my lessons are starting to take root, Kakashi joked with an eye smile. Earning a glare from the brunette, he continued, Naruto can just flash away if anything serious happens. Besides, I thought you said you wanted a little action. While this answer seemed to appease him, it wasn't exactly the whole truth. To be honest, it would be trouble enough for any jounin to have to watch one air, but Kakashi had to watch too. Adding the son of his late sensei into the mix, Kakashi was responsible for 3 of the most important figures of their age group in Konoha. By keeping them both close to him, he could have Hinata help with his search and the two would be able to support each other if anything went wrong. It was a win-win. You still won't answer me about that technique, Sasuke said, cutting him out of his train of thought. And you still won't ask him yourself, Kakashi replied, like I've told you, it's a technique he has been working on for a long time, and I'm sure he'd be delighted to talk about it with someone. Although, I will admit he'd likely brag about it for a while before you could actually get anything useful from him. He finished with a sweat drop before his serious composure returned to his face. If there aren't any other questions, then let's move out. Yoshio had been amazed as he watched the Konoha genin get to work. This was just ridiculous. No genin, or even jounin for that matter, should have enough chakra to pump out that many clones. Iwa's mole was leaning against the shed with the other workers as they watched the boy put them to shame. He had been watching the team since they arrived and he too had been shocked to see the arrival of Kakashi Hatake. This was going to present a problem. He had noticed the man looking suspicious when he arrived at the complex, and Yoshio had seen him dart out of the gate during the night. He had sent a message to Daiki immediately, asking if he had been uncovered. He was instantly on guard when he received the message. While they hadn't been discovered, Hatake knew something was wrong. They were now making a plan to lure the man's attention away from the development. As he stared at the Konoha jounin in question, he racked his brain for something that would help his protection unit. As he gazed at the boy, who was becoming unsettlingly familiar to him, he spied the metal case full of the boy's scrolls. He suppressed a grin as he watched Kakashi and his other genin head into the woods. He called to his so-called colleagues and headed off towards the outhouses. When he was sure he was out of sight, he bit his finger and slammed his hand to the ground. A cloud of smoke appeared before revealing a small gopher sitting on its hind legs. What up, boss? Another message for Daiki? He nodded and relayed his message. The IWA unit sat in their cave hidden a few feet underground. It was easy enough for any IWA nin to perform. 2 Doton Jutsu to clear out the space and make holes for air, and bam, you had yourself a small base hidden away from the eyes of the enemy. As they sat there, Daiki's eyes shot open when he heard scratching against the walls and one of Yoshio's gopher summons poked its head through the wall. It was startled when metal spike landed next to its head and it wailed, "It's me, you idiots. Hold your fire." Q held Takara's arm to ensure that the brown-haired Chunin would shoot anything else at the poor creature. Daiki crouched before the gopher and asked, "What news does Yoshio have? You're going to have to push up your timetable, it said as it brushed off its tiny maroon shirt. That kid from Konoha is really something else. Apparently they are going to be done by later tonight with the pace he is setting. That's impossible. What is the Uchiha doing that could make the process of loading the carriages go by that quickly? It's not the Uchiha kid, it's some blonde kid doing some quirky things with seals. Takara's head shot up and his eyes narrowed at this comment. He's using Kage Bunshin to speed up the process, as well as putting all the lumber into storage seals. Daiki was impressed. For a mere genin to have enough chakra to summon that many Kage Bunshin was astounding. What also surprised him was that apparently the boy was knowledgeably in Fuinjutsu. No wonder the kid was paired up with such important teammates. As he continued his conversation with the summons, Takara and Q were having their own conversation. Don't you think about it, Q whispered. Think about what? Takara glared. Drop the bullshit, Takara. We've known each other for a long time, and I know that look. Just because the kid has blonde hair and knows Fuinjutsu does not mean he's related to him. You've got to let this search thing go. I will not. He angrily whispered back, you know what the yellow flash did to my family. He somehow saw through our techniques and spread the information along to his allies. If it wasn't for him, it was war, Q interjected. You can't stay mad at an enemy for defending his homeland. Don't forget, we were the ones that started the last war. Are you saying all those deaths are our fault? Takara glared as he rounded on him. You know I'm not. Stop making excuses for a fight. Now promise me you won't just take this opportunity as an excuse to vent and jeopardize the mission to attack this kid. Takara glared but didn't say anything. A puff of smoke caught their attention as Daiki turned back to them. Alright, change of plans. Listen up. This is going to make our old plan much more believable. In case you didn't know, this lumberyard is part of a major business chain for the Land of Fire that is led by the Daimyo himself. They supply lumber and paper all across the elemental nations. So, Q, you were going to stage an incident to make it look like we were stealing records of the company. You're still going to do this, but there is a small metal box, which contains all of the sealed up lumber for the order that you're going to have to find. You're going to make sure you are caught stealing it. Q nodded as the jounin went on, the rest of the plan remains the same. Takara, you will wait at the specified point and cover Q if things go south. He shouldn't have a problem with a genin or two, but it never hurts to be prepared. In the meantime, I will distract their jounin and lead him away from you. At some point, make it seem like they have recovered the box and head to the extraction point. I'll meet up with you there and we will proceed to head out of Fire Country. This would draw the attention away from the possibility of a spy and give Konoha a different problem to address. It would seem as if they were hired to steal records for a rival company instead of their actual objective. Our mission is a go tonight. Sasuke had been a little disappointed when their search resulted in nothing. Even with the aid of Hinata's Byakugan, they were unable to turn up anything. After 8 o'clock, they headed back to the complex in defeat. As they neared the lumberyard, they heard loud chanting which only increased in volume the closer they got. When they saw the horde of Naruto's clones huddled around their work area and they weren't alone. The injured workers and other employees who had been out in the woods cutting down new trees all day were shouting encouragement to the final group. The copies of Naruto seemed exhausted as they carried the final block onto the pile. The original beamed as he shook the hands of his clones. They let out a weary sigh as they meandered off and sat off on the sideline with the rest. Naruto brought out the last scroll and sealed the pile away and dropped it in the box. Yada! We are done! He shouted, which was met with a roar of applause from the workers. Great job you guys! Couldn't do it without you, Naruto beamed at his army of clones. They all broke out in their trademark smile, as Sasuke cut in, talking to yourself now dope? I'd be a little concerned. A chorus of shut the hell up was his response as they all whipped their heads around to stare at him. He had to admit it was a little unnerving. Naruto started to form the release hand sign when a thought crept into Kakashi's head. Wait a minute Naruto. Release! The blonde shouted. All the clones disappeared in a giant puff of smoke, earning a couple surprised shouts from the crowd. When the dust finally cleared, the blonde boy was lying sprawled out on his back unconscious. I was afraid of that, Kakashi thought as the workers and Hinata rushed up to him. What just happened? Sasuke asked. That, Sasuke, is one of the reasons why I forbade Naruto from teaching you that jutsu. You see, Kage Bunshin are very useful due to all of their experiences and memories being sent back to the user. As you can see, this includes all of their physical exhaustion as well. His mind was just bombarded by the exhaustion from all of these clones. He should have released them in groups instead of all at once. Remind me to warn him to never do that again. Is he going to be alright? Kenta asked with genuine concern. He'll be fine. He recovers faster than anyone I've ever seen. Although he is going to be exhausted for the next day or two. That's such a shame, and to think, I just had the chefs whip up a special meal for him. When he wasn't talking about seals, all he would talk about was ramen. Ramen. The boy sprang up, surprising everyone as he stared at the manager. You really did that for MOHO. I don't feel so good. He collapsed on his hands and knees as Hinata rushed to his side. Kakashi shook his head. The boy really had a one-track mind. Are you okay, Naruto? Kakashi asked, kneeling down next to the boy. He panted heavily as he tried to give the man a smile. You know me. Kakashi-sensei. I can bounce back from anything. Give me a soldier pill, and I'll be just fine. No need for that, all that will do is make it harder for you to fall asleep later. After you've eaten, I want you to hit the hay immediately. Is that understood? You won't get any complaints from me, sensei. Let's go, Hinata-chan. He wearily exclaimed as she helped him make his way to the mess tent. The workers chuckled as they started heading out to their own temporary accommodations. Kakashi eyed his remaining student. Not joining them? I'll pass. I'd rather spend my time looking into our little problem. Kakashi nodded. He was just as frustrated as his students when their results turned up nothing. At least it had been an instructional day for the two of them. He had gone over several of his own tracking techniques as they searched through the forest. Alright, do some rounds around the facility and ask some of the workers if they have seen anything strange lately. What about you? I'm going to be doing the same thing, but much more discreetly. Meet me back here in an hour and we'll compare notes. With that, he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Sasuke put his hands in his pockets and headed off towards the workers' new accommodations. From the tree line, a pair of eyes stared down as these events played out. 1 down, 3 to go. It was a little disturbing to see Naruto eat that slowly. Usually, the blonde gulped down his meals without a second thought as fast as he could. Now, the boy was taking his time as he fought to stay awake. He was never someone to turn down free ramen, especially when it was a reward for all of his hard work. Hinata sat with him offering words of encouragement as he fought against the sweet lull of slumber. The chefs were laughing the entire time, especially when the blonde nearly face-planted into the bowl. After an hour of pure willpower, the blonde finally finished his meal and thanked the chefs. With some help from Hinata, the pair made their way back towards their campsite. Thank you, Hinata, the blonde panted as they passed by the administrative building, for helping me get through all that. I promised to make it up to you. Why, you don't have to do anything, Naruto-kun. I am always happy to help. Come on, Hinata-chan. You're too sweet all the time. You're going to start making me feel bad. There has to be something I can help you with. After everything you've done for me over the past few weeks, it's the least I can do. Hinata was about to refute him, when something popped into her mind. She had been looking for help on a certain subject. Maybe it was time to share it with her team. Actually, she was cut when she had a loud voice shout, "What do you think you're doing in my office?" The glass window on the floor above them shattered, raining glass on the duo below as a figure darted out and raced towards the main gate. After him. Kenta pleaded as he poked his head out of the broken window. That man just took off with the box full of the sealed lumber. Hinata's eyes whipped towards the man who held a bunch of paper in one hand and the black box in the other. While she didn't see the headband, there was no mistaking that red and brown uniform. IWA. She desperately looked between the exhausted boy in her arms and the retreating form of the man. She couldn't just leave him. What if there were other IWA shinobi in the area? Go on, Hinata-chan. Go kick his ass, the blonde encouraged with a smile. I'll watch after the boy. Go after that hooligan and show him what happens when you mess with the land of fire. She smiled and set blonde down as gently as she could before racing after the figure. She had found their elusive intruder. She wasn't the only one. At the same time, Kakashi had been amiably speaking with one of the workers when something caught his eye behind the man's head. A tall, dark figure dashed into the woods with a limp object on his back. Kakashi felt his heart rate pick up when he saw what was on the back of the limp object's shirt, a red and white fan symbol. Pushing past the man mid-sentence, the Jounin raced after the disappearing silhouette as it disappeared deeper into the forest. He had already failed one Uchiha in his lifetime, he was not going to fail another. Hinata and her target dashed between the trees as they raced further and further away from the complex. She reached into her pouch and flung a kunai at the intruder, who ducked his head at the last second. A second later the kunai exploded, sending the perpetrator flying back towards her. Veins bulged around her eyes, as she prepared to intercept the enemy shinobi mid-air. She reached out for a strike, only for target to twist mid-air and kick off her back onto another tree branch. She grabbed a tree branch as she fell and spun back around to face her opponent. He was a young man in his early 20s with a calm disposition on his face. With her Byakugan, she noted the singed paper and black box he had been carrying on the forest floor behind. She dropped down from the tree and took up a defensive stance in front of the objects. "What are you doing in the land of fire?" The man failed to comment as he dropped to the ground, weaving hand signs. "Doton, core entrapment," he shouted as he slammed his hands to the ground. With her Byakugan, Hinata could see his chakra racing and melding into the ground almost in slow motion. She leaped into the air as the earth contorted into spikes which shot forward to impale her. Twisting midair, she noticed the man racing through more hand signs. "Katon, Ember Barrage," he shouted as a multiple fireballs sprang from his fingertips. She stared helplessly as the fire raced towards her. The fire engulfed its target and it fell to the floor below in a smoldering heap. "Damn," Q thought as he landed and stared at the heap of fire, "I had expected more from the Hyuga girl." He stared at the burning object and recognized it as a block of wood just in time to dodge the chakra-infused strike coming from behind. The two danced across the trees as he desperately tried to avoid being touched by her hands. Although he was a chunin, the girl had caught him off guard. He tried to regain his bearings and start pressing back against the girl, but she wouldn't give him the chance. She was lashing out with her palms in sharp, controlled movements, and it was all he could do, simply block the strikes. He continued to backpedal until his back hit the base of a tree and the girl was quickly upon him. Having no choice, he reached out and caught her hands with his own. He felt the sharp pain creep into his hands as he held her at arm's length. The two struggled for dominance. Q did have age and size on the girl, but it was hard to push back as she kept pumping her chakra into his hands. It was all he could do to hold her at bay, due to the agonizing pain. With his longer reach, he kicked her in the stomach and shoved her away. Finally having a moment to breath, he massaged his hands which felt as if they were cramping up on him. The girl took a moment to catch her breath after the kick, and returned her glare to the IWA Chunin. "You can no longer mold jutsu in your hands. Please consider surrendering," he chuckled. At least the girl had some modest manners. "No can do, Lady Hyuga. It would be rather shameful for a chunin just to surrender because of that." While not normally terrifying, the veins around her eyes certainly added to her intimidation factor. "You cannot best a Hyuga in hand-to-hand combat," she droned just as her father had drilled into her head for years. "I do not wish to cause you more harm than necessary." Well, would you look at that? A Hyuga with a heart. This actually was a good opportunity for him. It gave him a good excuse to hightail it out of here. His mission was a success. The manager and her teammate had both seen him ransacking the office and now she could easily reclaim the goods. He opened his mouth to reply, when his eyes widened by the sight behind her. She noticed his expression and was surprised when something appeared just out of the blind spot of her Byakugan. She twisted out of the way as a sharp pain lit up across her left arm. She fell to the ground as another figure appeared before her. "You aren't going anywhere, Konoha scum. Takara, what the hell are you doing?" He had been given the perfect opportunity to tap out and head to the extraction point. What was Takara thinking? Screw the mission. I need answers. You! Hyuga! He yelled as he pointed a slender finger at her. Hinata ripped her sleeve off as she tried to bandage the cut that raced down her arm. She was shocked when she looked at her attacker and found a slender needle-like metal appendage pointing right at her. What in the world was he? Tell me everything you know about your blonde bastard of a teammate. What on earth did Naruto have to do with this? His other arm shifted and she was horrified to see his hand take on a metallic sheen before morphing into a massive ball. You're going to tell me or I'm going to make it excruciating for you. Spikes sprung from the sphere as if to accent his point. So start talking. The young girl pushed herself up and ignored the lash on her arm as she stared at the slender man standing before her. Hinata was not typically a brave person. She was honestly a very meek person, who shied away from conflict. She was also starting to feel inadequate being on the same team as Sasuke and Naruto. Each of them was a prodigy in their own right, while she felt like the third wheel on the path forward. But at this moment, neither of them was here. It was just her against a crazed metallic maniac who wanted to harm the one she loved. Go on, Hinata-chan. Go kick his ass. The look he had given her was one of absolute confidence. He was certain she could do this, and she would not let him down. It wasn't just him. The Hokage believed in her enough to place her on the same team as legends. It was time she started earning that position. Stealing her resolve, she settled into her Juken stance and stared the crazed man right in his eyes. I dare you to try and make me. Chapter 12, Trial by Fire, Part 2. Perhaps taunting the emotionally unstable enemy ninja hadn't been her best idea. Hinata weaved from side to side as she backpedaled away from the barrage of metal talons that whipped through the air, inches from her face. She ducked to the side of the branch and pumped chakra into her feet, which jettisoned her away as the crazed Nin slammed his mace through the space she had just occupied, sending wooden splinters flying. I'm getting nowhere like this. She twisted midair and pulled out a kunai to deflect the barrage of metal spikes speeding towards her. She landed on a branch and quickly ducked behind the truck as a new barrage of needles peppered the bark. She pressed her back against the tree and tried to catch her breath. Her Byakugan could see the outline of his chakra clearly through the wood. She needed a plan. Her eyes widened and she ducked down as metallic claws sliced through the trunk of the tree right where her head had been. She twisted under the branch again and launched herself towards the ground. She needed time to think. As she fell, she put a handful of shuriken and flung them at the crazed enemy. His mace arm contorted into a rectangular shield, which the projectiles bounced off with a metallic clang. She panted and fell to one knee as she landed on the ground. All of this evading was going to tire her out, plus he was faster than her. Sooner or later he was going to catch up with her. There was also the other problem. With the almost 360 degrees field of vision granted by the Byakugan, she could also see the other IWA Nin behind her in the trees. The longer she took fighting this man, the harder it would be to take down his teammate. She was shook out of her thoughts as the crazed man screamed at her. I asked you before, so start talking before I have to take a limb. Tell me about the blonde brat. Silence and an angry glare was his only response. Fine, he said as his arm shifted from a large mace into an axe head. Dismemberment it is. She ignored him. Instead, she was focusing on his chakra network as his arm changed shape. The tenketsu in his arm were working overtime. He must have to keep pumping chakra through his arms to maintain that shape. He was also in a war of attrition. Although his reserves were larger, they were depleting much faster than hers. Even so, this would still not be enough for her to outlast him. No doubt he would recognize if he needed to conserve chakra, and his teammate would certainly jump in if it got too hectic for him. There was something else that was on her mind. If his body was covered in metal, what was the shield for? Was there a limit or a weak spot in his armor? Time to run some tests. By now, the IWA Chunin was nearly upon her, deciding to jump down straight at her then running down the tree. As he drew closer, she reached into her bag and threw down 2 smoke grenades. Takara coughed and whipped around as the clouds of purple smoke consumed him. He squeezed his eyes as his vision was completely blurred. All the while, a pair of white eyes gazed at him through the smoke. She circled the man and started a barrage of shuriken as she ran. A stray shuriken bounced off of his head and chest with a clang. He growled and yelled, "Stop it, you irritating bitch!" Before raised his shield to block the rain of sharp metal. There it was. If it had no effect, why did he need the shield? She noted the shape of the shield. The top of it stopped just below his neck and it reached down to the ground. Was there a weak spot lower? Then she saw it. She hadn't noticed it earlier as he chased her, but now it stuck out like a sore thumb. The tenketsu in his arms and chest were well above average size. However, the tenketsu in his legs were disproportionately small. They were about the size you would find in a toddler. As it turned out, Takara hailed from the Zaofu clan. They had been blessed with the particular ability to restructure the composition of their body into steel. With this useful Kekai Genkai, their bodies were all the weapons they ever needed. They could configure their body into any shape as long as they had the chakra reserves to maintain it. They had been one of Iwa's most respected clans, until the Yondaime Hokage discovered 2 fatal flaws in their clan's jutsu and spread these weaknesses throughout the Land of Fire. One of these flaws was that while the tenketsu in their upper body grew at an abnormal rate, the ones in their lower body left much to be desired. As a result, they had difficulty transferring the effects of their jutsu towards their legs, especially around the ankles. They were the living embodiment of an Achilles heel. Hinata's eyes gleamed as she gripped her kunai. Kakashi raced after the unknown assailant. He was not about to let the Uchiha clan's last hope get away. He finally got within range of the man and shined ahead of his path. He intercepted the unknown assailant midair and drove a kunai straight through his eye and out the back of his skull. The man crumpled into the knife and Kakashi's eye widened as he recognized the headband. IWA. What could they possibly be doing this deep in fire country? Before he could remove his knife, the man's face sagged before turning into a giant pile of mud. Mud clone, he muttered. Kakashi was instantly alert. He reached to pick up the limp boy, but realized something wasn't right. He was too heavy. After he noticed the buzzing feeling in the back of his head, he finally recognized the genjutsu. Release. Instantly the illusion lifted, revealing a dead worker from the lumberyard. Kakashi could only stare at the body in shock, and then it hit him. He had been tricked. The IWA Jounin played him. He had set a simple trap and successfully lured him away from the others. Kakashi unceremoniously dropped the dead body, and started speeding back towards the complex, doubling the amount of chakra in his legs. No doubt the others were in the thick of things. There was no way they were prepared for a Jounin. He could only hope that Naruto understood the severity of his weakened state and decided to stay out of the action for once. For if they recognized him, he shuddered as he darted back towards his students. Takara was irritated. He began firing spikes randomly from his hand into the smoke. He needed to get out of this. As he started to move, he heard a noise to his right as a barrage of shuriken and kunai flew towards him. He raised his arm and blocked most of the assault. It wasn't until he heard a hiss at his feet that he started to get worried. He morphed his arms into flat boards and slammed them in front of him as the explosions started going off. He struggled against the concussive force of the exploding tags when he sensed something behind him. He was only fast enough to see the Hyuga girl appear out of the smoke with kunai in hand. She quickly stabbed one into his heel and another into his thigh, right through one of his tenketsu. He roared in pain and whipped the shield around, trying to knock the girl back, but she managed to leap out of the way. The moment she landed, she was quickly sprinting back towards him. His arm began to contort, but she brushed it out of the way with her glowing palms as she got inside of his guard. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, the man realized how much danger he was actually in. In the split second before her attack, he formed a small amount of chakra in his chest. He hoped it would be enough. 8 trigrams 64 palm guard. While it had guard in the title, the offensive capabilities of this attack were staggering. Concentrated blades of chakra raced across his body in parabolas as he was literally cut to pieces. His metal body was sturdy, but this was finesse at its finest, carving its way through his armor and out his back. Simply put, the jutsu sliced through him like paper. As the blue net of chakra disappeared, Hinata backed away and panted. That had eaten up over a third of her chakra. This was first jutsu she had ever created, and she was very proud of it. She had thought of the idea after going through some of her mother's notes. Her mother had her developed her own technique that involved forming chakra into a sharp blade, but the chakra control needed for it was currently out of Hinata's league. Instead, she had chosen to take the basic principle and try to use it to duplicate a technique she did not have mastered yet, the kaiten. The result was a technique that could be spread out all around her for defense, or focused in front of her for offense. As she gazed upon her work, she felt as though she was going to be sick. It was like a mannequin had been attacked by a samurai. What was left of the man knelt on his knees and his body was splayed apart. Thankfully, the inside of his body visible from the cuts did not show any blood or organs. Instead, it looked as if someone had made smooth clean cut through a block of metal. With a sigh of relief, she started to turn towards the man's comrade when the bundle of metal and flesh shuddered. Her eyes were as wide as saucers as her head whipped back to the body as the open cuts began melding back together. Just how durable was he? She reached into her bag for an explosive tag to finish it when a barrage of kunai flew at her from the trees. She jumped back as Q landed between her and his teammate. She scowled as she noted the red chakra burns on his hands. He had been trying to force his tenketsu open, but apparently to little avail. He sighed as he reached into his pouch and pulled out a large red pill. He stuck it in his mouth and bit down. Hinata was shocked as his chakra system raged violently. It hadn't been a soldier pill, but it seemed to be having a similar effect. She was even more surprised as the pressure in his hands finally burst and his tenketsu were forced open. opening his tenketsu open that forcefully was sure to leave major lacerations to his chakra network. Unless he was treated immediately, he was going to suffer from severe trauma to his hands for years. While this thought raced through his mind, he momentarily ignored it, for he had accomplished his goal. He could mold chakra again. He grit his teeth through the agonizing pain as he began forming hand signs. She quickly flung her kunai as he slammed his hands into the ground. Doton, Earth-style wall. Rock and dirt erupted from the ground, blocking the kunai, and sheltered the IWA shinobi from the ensuing explosion. After it died down, Q jumped onto the wall and looked down at the Hinata. Although his eyes were full of great pain, they also held an apologetic look. While I don't agree with his behavior towards you, I cannot sit idly by and allow you to kill my friend. She ignored him as she stared through the wall at the figure behind it. His chakra was greatly diminished, but the man was getting back up. She took a step back as a metallic claw gripped the side of the rock wall. As he looked around the wall, his face was full of rage as he stared at the tiny girl in front of him. You are going to regret that, he said with a voice far too calm to match his face. She was so focused on him that she did not notice the other man speeding through hand signs. Doton, stone binding. His words broke Hinata out of her trance, but she was too slow to react when the earth beneath her shot up and clamped down on her legs. Hold her still, Q, Takara growled. He raised his arm and it shot forward towards the girl, too quick for her to see. She raised her hands as if to somehow block the attack, when a windmill shuriken cleanly cut through the arm. Takara screamed in pain as two shadows landed in front of her. I thought you were the one who stressed how important Kakashi's teamwork lessons were. You shouldn't have gone off by yourself, Hinata. Be nice, team. You're just jealous you weren't the one to get to fight by yourself. You did amazing, Hinata-chan. You tore that guy apart. She let out a sigh of relief at the sight of the two boys in front of her. Sasuke stared down the two IWA Chunin as Naruto began helping the girl out of the constraints around her legs. Sasuke and I arrived just in time to see you slice up that bastard. That was awesome. She nodded her head as he helped her to her feet. As she studied his face, she was shocked by how tired he seemed. He had to be at the tipping point. He was facing so much fatigue that he was only standing up through sheer willpower. Sasuke shot her a glance over his shoulder. Hinata, you did a good job. Let me take care of the metal freak, while you and the dobe take care of the other Chunin. She started to protest, but he shot her a look. I am completely fresh and have full reserves of chakra. You on the other hand do not. Make sure the idiot doesn't trip over his own feet, and take out that other nin. She couldn't argue with his logic and stood on her feet. His weakness is in his legs. His shape-shifting ability has extreme difficulty covering them. He nodded as all three of them stared at their opponents. Takara's mind went blank by the sudden arrival of the two boys. He had only assumed when he had overheard Daiki's speech earlier, but a part of him didn't really believe it. But now as he stood across from the boy, there was no doubt about that hair color. That shape. His apparent skill in Fuinjutsu. It all added up. You. He hung his head and started to shake as everyone turned their attention to him. His face shot up as he glared at Naruto. You bastard! The man sprung forward, batting the other two aside, as he lunged for the boy. It took everything he had to duck below the blow, and he began racing away from the crazed nin. I'm going to kill you. Sasuke raced after the two as they worked their way further into the woods. Q began to move after them, but he was blocked by the kunoichi. Your battle is with me, Q-san. He frowned as he began forming hand signs. Earlier, Sasuke had been standing at Kakashi's designated point for over 20 minutes. He didn't know what could possibly be holding the man, but the whole atmosphere of the night was getting on his nerves. He left Central Area and started his way back towards the campsite. As he passed by the administration building, he was surprised to find Kenta hovering over Naruto a couple feet away from a pile of glass. He ran up to them as he assessed the scene. What happened here? The old man was distraught. I caught some ruffian rifling through our business records. To make matters worse, he dashed off with the entire shipment that Naruto boy sealed up today. Little Hinata-chan raced after him about 15 minutes ago. What? He asked incredulously before turning his attention to the blonde. You let her go off on her own. I can't go anywhere, Sasuke. She was the only one around, and the guy was getting away. Besides, she can take care of herself. Sasuke didn't doubt his teammates' abilities, but one should never run off without knowing the enemy's strength and numbers. For all they knew, she could have been lured into a trap. Why haven't you taken a soldier pill and gone after her? I would have already if I had any. Kakashi-sensei made sure Hinata-chan took them all away from me in case I tried to eat one to stay awake, Naruto grumbled, clearly frustrated by his own state of helplessness. Sasuke shook his head and reached into his bag, before handing a small pill to his blonde teammate. The blonde appreciated the gesture and gladly swallowed the horribly tasting pill. Energy surged through his system as he stood up. He was by no means at 100%, but at least he could move without others helping him. Lead the way. With that, the two boys left Kenta in the dust as they raced after their teammate. He could only pray that she didn't need them, but if she did, he hoped they made it in time. Present. Naruto cursed as another cut grazed his chest as he backpedaled away from the crazy shinobi. If he had been freshly rested, the boy would have easily outsped the IWA Chunin, but as it was, he was barely even staying alive. He jumped back again as the man raced towards him with renewed vigor. He took 5 steps before Sasuke Uchiha planted his feet in the man's face, slapped on a piece of paper, and kicked off before a tiny explosion sent the man flying back. Naruto rested his hands on his knees, grateful for the chance to regain his strength. Nice job, team. So what's the plan? Sasuke shot him a surprised and smug look. Are you actually letting me lead voluntarily? It may be the exhaustion talking, but I'll admit that you're a bit smarter than I am. Right now, I'm so tired I can barely think straight. So use that supposed prodigal brain of yours to think of a way to stop this homicidal bastard. Sasuke suppressed a grin as he stared at the IWA shinobi, who was starting to get back up. His mind raced with possibilities. From what Hinata said, he could only assume that shuriken and kunai would not work on this guy. Even in his current state, he was going to be more wary of his legs after what Hinata did to him. He also had to worry about the dobe. He didn't know why the IWA nin hated him so much, but he had his eyes set on tearing him apart. It was going to be difficult finding an opportunity to get at his legs, while protecting the blonde. As the man's face shifted from a metallic sheen back to his normal skin color, a thought raced through his mind. Naruto, do you still have any of those storage seals you made from earlier? Yeah, I guess. Why? How long would it take for you to alter the design of the seal? Naruto's face lit up, as he understood. Oh, I got it. Normally a minute or 2, but in my current state, I'd need about 5 minutes. Keep him off me, while I make the preparations. Take this. Sasuke nodded and stuck the piece of paper handed to him in his pouch as the IWA nin started racing towards them. If the dobe needed 5 minutes, he was going to get it. Hinata twisted as she dodged another spike from the ground as she raced towards her opponent. With every jutsu he cast, his hands were becoming more and more damaged from chakra burns. He growled as another flash of pain burst through his system and he pushed through more seals. Katon, flame salvo. He lifted his head as multiple fireballs shot through the air and raced towards the girl. She twisted and dodged her way around them as she raced toward the wall. The man back flipped off the wall forming more seals before he shouted, Doton, mobile core. He stretched his hands out as the wall of rock shot forward at alarming speeds. Hinata stuck to her path as the rock flew forwards and slid underneath it at the last second. Keeping her stride, she leapt back up to her feet and raced towards the man as she pulled out a kunai. Even though she's not as cold as the Hyuga I've heard about, she's just as lethal, Kyo thought as he pulled out his own kunai and raced towards her. Sasuke stared back at his reflection across the metal sheen of the man's arms as sparks flew past his face. He held 2 kunai within his grasp as he and the metal man traded blows. If he had been in his normal mental state, the man probably could have overpowered the boy, but he was in a state of rage and was flailing wildly. He was also still injured from his previous bout with the Hyuga. His ankle was still throbbing as he worked his way past the pain. As they clashed once again, he used his superior strength to fling the Uchiha back. The boy flipped in their air before landing gracefully on his feet. Stop getting in my way, Uchiha. You can't stop me from getting the yandere brat. Sasuke shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about, but I can't let you murder my teammate. Even if it would save me some headaches in the future. The man growled as his eyes scanned the canopy. The boy couldn't have gone too far. It had only been a matter of minutes. Although he wasn't a sensor, he could still feel the boy's chakra in the area. The boy's reserves were so potent that it was like sending a flare in the air. Even those with basic sensors training could pick him up. As his eyes combed the area, he noticed the Uchiha eye a certain tree off to the side. Whipping his head in that direction, he finally saw the brat sitting on a tree working on a scroll. Sasuke cursed as Takara lunged at the blonde. No! No Fuinjutsu out of you! Naruto was startled and jumped away from the branch as the man landed, kicking up a cloud of splinters. The boy hastily began forming the finishing touches as he dashed away from the man. Sasuke was in quick pursuit and he noticed they were heading back towards Hinata. If the two IWA means were able to regroup, it would be harder for them to execute their plan. Hurry up, you dumbass, he thought. Hinata and Q were furiously exchanging blows when the blonde boy and his pursuers burst into view. And... got it! I got it! It's ready! Did you plant it, Sasuke? It's done! Hurry up and do it! Naruto formed his hands in a seal and yelled activate. Instantly, Takara felt himself dead drop from his mid-air jump and slammed into the ground. He growled as he struggled against the invisible weight that seemed to keep him pressed against the ground. When the hell had they planted a seal on him? He froze as he remembered his exchange with the Uchiha. He must have planted it then. But when could he have done it? What the hell have you done to me? Ignoring him, the two boys landed next to the crater and began vigorously going through hand signs. Panic spread across Takara's face when they both landed on the Tora sign. They took in a deep breath of air before yelling to the sky. Katan, Fireball Jutsu. Katan, Fox Hellfire. The two boys let loose on the IWA Nin as he was enveloped in a raging inferno. The area erupted with light and the roar of the flames quickly overshadowed the screams of agony. His flesh would have been seared away by the immense heat, but he quickly covered his entire body to metal. As the flame raged on, he began melting into a silver puddle. Even as he was melted down into a liquid form, his consciousness was still aware of what was going on. Oh, he was going to slaughter them after he reformed. He was going to get his hands on every last Konoha shinobi. Yuta-sama would make sure that their stupid village was burned to the ground. His thoughts of rage quickly changed to fear as the blonde cut off his jutsu and spread open the scroll in his hands. He faced the open page towards the crater and yelled, "Seal." Immediately, the liquid sprung up towards the seal and the man screamed as he was forcibly sucked inside. After 10 seconds of blistering heat raking the boy's fingers, the liquid in the crater was gone and a kanji symbol for steel suddenly appeared on the page. Sealing a human being away may have been too complicated due to all of the elements that made up the human body, but he sure as hell could seal away a simple alloy. This distraction was all Hinata needed as she snuck her way into the man's guard. "You are within range of my divination," she said calmly. The man's eyes shot open as her fingers danced across his body, forcefully closing his tenketsu. 8 trigrams 32 palms. She shouted as she delivered the final blow. The man slumped over onto his face as the girl fell to her knees. She panted and grinned at the boys standing above the steaming crater. They had done it. They had actually done it. Q was distraught. The plan was a bust. While they certainly would draw attention from their mole, they were now at risk of jeopardizing the mission. If they were captured and brought before a Yamanaka, it would all be for nothing. Fighting back tears and working through the blinding pain, he reached into his pocket and grasped a handful of explosive tags. "I'm sorry," Hyuga-san coughed as he glanced towards her. Her eyes widened as a roar of flame engulfed the two of them. Naruto had about 3.84 seconds to respond. The moment he saw Hinata's opponent reach into his bag, he was sprinting towards them. He pushed past his exhaustion as he forced his legs to go beyond their limits. He would save her. He had to save her. His muscles strained as he forced them to move, and he scooped up the girl right as the explosion went off. Sasuke could only watch in horror as the ball of flame engulfed his teammates. Not again. He couldn't be left alone again. In a heartbeat, the blonde appeared in front of him in a flash of yellow light. Sasuke stumbled back in shock, not noticing the tri-pronged kunai that lay at his feet. Hinata stared up at the blonde in awe. One moment, she was sure she was staring into her own death. The next thing she knew, she was overcome by the strangest sensation she had ever felt, and now she was staring up at the silhouetted face of her crush. It was a moment she would never forget. His face was perfectly lit up by the explosion behind him as concern was etched across his face. He tentatively held her in his arms as he clutched her to his chest. It was perfect. Until the blonde's cheeks began to bulge and he regurgitated Kenta's special meal for him all over Hinata's lap. And just like that, the moment was gone. Daiki could not believe the carnage he saw before him. That idiot Takara had gotten himself sealed and Q had been beaten by a single genin. He had led Kakashi on a wild goose chase with a disguised worker from the yard, before sending a clone off to keep him distracted. He had been surprised when he arrived to find no one at the rendezvous point. He hadn't been exactly worried for his Chunin companions, but they only had so much time before Kakashi would figure out his ruse. As he stumbled into their battleground, the sight that met him had floored him. He could barely believe his eyes. There was no mistaking that jutsu. The blonde had performed the Hiration. Suddenly everything fell into place. His hair. His skill in Fuinjutsu. He could not allow this boy to live. It would be disastrous for IWA. He raced towards the boy, who had dropped his female teammate as he tried to steady himself. The Uchiha noticed him and shouted at his teammates, while trying to cut the jounin off. There was a big difference between a Chunin and a jounin, and Daiki demonstrated this as he easily slipped past the boy's defenses, rammed a kunai into his shoulder, and knocked the wind out of him as he shoved him out of the way. He raced towards the blonde, kunai in hand, as the boy stumbled to stay upright. He was a foot away from the boy with his kunai reared back to stab, when he was jolted to a halt and cold feeling burst through his own chest. He violently shuddered as he slowly looked down to see a hand coated in dancing lightning protruding through his heart. Blood trailed from his mouth and he turned around just long enough to stare into a single red eye before the world turned dark around him. Chapter 13, Downtime, Part 1. Team 7 stood quietly as Kakashi finished his report. They shifted uncomfortably under the Hokage's steady gaze, as the sunset behind the man silhouetted the man's intimidating profile. The Hokage wanted to sigh as he stared at the genin before him. It was too late in the day for this. He just couldn't seem to catch a break. It had barely been 2 months since they graduated, and they were already causing him headaches. Only Team 7 could turn a simple D-rank mission into an A-rank and spark an international incident. Of course, IWA was in the wrong here, and they knew it. He was going to make sure that they felt pressure for their actions. He was confident that the Fire Daimyo would have some choice words for the Earth Daimyo, when he found out someone had been actively trying to sabotage his business. Thankfully, they had all returned from their first encounter with an enemy ninja relatively unharmed. Apart from a few cuts and bruises, they weren't much worse for wear. The day after the battle, Hinata had been sure to treat Sasuke's stab wound to ensure it didn't get infected, and Naruto took the time to work off his exhaustion as he slept for 14 hours. While this prevented them from leaving, Kento was very accommodating. They had originally planned to head back to the village 3 or 4 days after their arrival anyway. Since they had finished early and successfully retrieved the stolen items, he was more than happy to wait a day or two before they all headed back. "Thank you for your report, Kakashi." He gazed over the genin and reassured them with a smile. "I must say that I am very impressed with all of you. Each of you should be commended for your contributions to the success of the mission. It speaks highly of your ability to keep a level head in that kind of situation and work as a team. Especially you, Hinata-chan. Not many genin can hold off 2 Chunin alone and actually come close to disabling both of them. You should be proud." The girl tried to shrink into her jacket as her face lit up from such praise. Naruto smiled and patted her on the back, while Sasuke smirked at her reaction. "That is not to say that I'm not impressed with you boys either." Kenta had nothing but praise for you, Naruto, and he was anxious to find out when he could get you back. Naruto also began to blush as he rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. "Sasuke, I'm also very pleased by your performance. You were able to stay calm and form a plan that utilized the strengths of your teammates and yourself. It speaks a lot of your ability as a leader. Well done." Even if he didn't show it, Sasuke was secretly pleased from the praise. "I'd say Team 7 has earned a few days off. I'll leave the details to Kakashi, but make sure to take some time to recuperate after your endeavors. Sasuke, make sure to stop by the hospital before you head home. I'm confident that Hinata was able to patch you up just fine, but I'd still prefer it if you went and saw professional help. You are all dismissed." They bowed and turned to Kakashi, who gave them a wave. "Meet me back at the training grounds in 3 days, and make sure to be on time. Try not to strain yourselves in the meantime. Now take a long rest. You've earned it." The 3 of them nodded and bid their farewell to the Hokage before shuffling out the door. Kakashi turned back to the Sandaime as the atmosphere became more serious. He reached into his bag and pulled out a green scroll, which he handed to the Hokage. "I take it this contains the Chunin from the Zaofu clan?" The Hokage asked as he inspected the scroll. Kakashi nodded. It was a very clever idea. When sealing away something, the structure of the seal had to be prepared for that specific item. Kunai, shuriken, and other weaponry were easy enough because they consisted mostly of iron. The fewer elements present in the object one hoped to seal, the less complicated the formula had to be. However, a human body was so diverse and difficult to measure that it was almost impossible to seal away a living person. The boys had forced the IWA Nin into his metal form, which greatly reduced the amount of elements present in his body, making it simple for Naruto to restructure the sealing scroll. "What are you planning to do with him?" he asked out of curiosity. The Sandaime waved his hand and an ANBU suddenly appeared next to him. "Please make sure that this is delivered to Ibiki, and tell him to wait for further instructions." "Hi Hokage-sama," she nodded and shunshined out of the room. "I haven't decided yet. We first have to see if he actually survived the sealing process." In his metallic state, his consciousness may have been able to withstand the effects of the transition. If he survived, I'm going to let Ibiki handle his interrogation. After we are sure we have gotten everything we can from him, I may use him as a bartering chip if Anoki decides to be difficult. Though, I don't suspect there will be too much trouble from his end of discussions. He's facing enough problems as it is. While things were certainly peaceful in the land of fire, the same could not be said for the rest of the world. In all honesty, Kyumo was the only truly stable hidden village at the moment. While Konoha wasn't facing any major problems, even now, they were still recovering from the backlash of the Kyubi attack and the Uchiha massacre. Suna was currently facing some economic problems. Then again, due to their topography, they would never truly be as successful as their neighboring countries. While Iwa's economy was stable due to their bountiful mining industry, they were facing some social unrest within the ranks of their shinobi. "What's the word from IWA?" Kakashi asked. According to Jiraiya's network, Anoki is facing some dissent amongst his ranks. He still holds the support of the majority of the shinobi in his forces, but the numbers of those who favor the ideals of his opponent are not to be dismissed out of hand. "How familiar are you with Yuta Tsubasa?" "The name sounds familiar, but all I can remember is that he's on their council. He is certainly someone to keep an eye on. While Anoki may harbor a grudge towards us for their loss in the last war, he at least has a modicum of respect for us. He would never strike back for something as petty as revenge." Yuta Tsubasa, on the other hand, does not share his peers' perspective. He is rather vocal about his displeasure towards us. If he is causing trouble, why doesn't that Otsutsuki deal with him? For the same reason I still allow Danzo to continue that secret organization of his. At the moment, Yuta's services for the village do more good than harm. Besides, he is far too clever than to oppose that Otsutsuki directly. The old buzzard would never publicly stand against his orders. He rebels against him in more subtle ways, such as through his public speeches. He mostly targets those who lost family in the last war, but he is trying to widen his umbrella of influence. Sounds to me that Yuta would be happier to get the Zaofu back than that Otsutsuki would. Indeed. In any case, if we do send him back, we will have to have a Yamanaka wipe his mind of particular events. Kakashi knew the conversation would be heading in this direction. From your report, both he and the Jounin seemed to recognize the boy immediately. Well, Naruto wasn't exactly being very subtle about it, Kakashi said as he scratched his head. The Jounin only recognized him because he saw him use the Hiraition to save Hinata. Even so, the resemblance is uncanny. Honestly, I never understand how no one in our village ever makes the connection. It shocks me as well, but ignorance tends to blind those with a heavy heart, the Hokage commented. Although everything managed to work out this time, I am concerned of what could happen in the future. It is only going to get more difficult for you to watch over all three of them. They need to be ready for the challenges I'm certain are heading their way. I was thinking just the same thing, sir. In fact, I have a request. After several minutes, the Sandaime rolled around Kakashi's proposal in his head. Any drawbacks he could think of were quite light when compared to the possible benefits. It was just a matter of bending protocol. If I were to agree to this, I have terms of my own that you would have to submit to. Before I tell you them, I have to be sure. Would you be fully committed to this? Absolutely, sir. The events of the mission must have shaken the man more than he had thought. The Hokage pulled out his pipe and lit it with his finger. He took a few puffs before he returned his gaze to the Jounin. All right. I will allow it. On these terms. For once, the sight of the Hyuga compound brought a smile to her face. She couldn't believe she'd only been gone for a few days. Hinata was looking forward to a nice, hot shower before heading to sleep. She was broken out of her daydream when she realized her father would be expecting her to report to him as soon as she got home. Her mood quickly dimmed, as she took her time shuffling towards his office. She still hadn't made up her mind about how she was going to bring up her issue to him. Assuming her plan of writing down the story on a different scroll worked, it was certain that he would want to know where it came from. Bringing her right back to where she started. How could she tell him without lying? She was so preoccupied by her internal debate that she did not realize she had been standing outside his office for several minutes. "Hinata, I know you are there. Please come in," her father's voice rang behind the door. Shaking off her stupor, she slid open the door and entered. Her father sat at his desk like he had every day with that same stern look on his face. "I take it your short mission was a success." "Yes, sir, although we did run into some complications." He merely raised an eyebrow as he waited for her to continue. What could have possibly been so bad on a D-rank mission? Hayashi already knew of the C-rank curse that seemed to plague every iteration of Team 7, but he wasn't expecting it to happen so soon. They hadn't even been assigned a C-rank yet. "We encountered 3 IWA shinobi who were trying to steal shipping and financial information from the Lumberyard. My team and I were forced to intervene and subdue them." Hayashi frowned as he gave her his undivided attention. "Start from the beginning." Hayashi closed his eyes as he digested the information. It was worrying to hear that IWA would be daring enough to venture this deep into Fire Nation territory. "I am very pleased with your performance. Your ability to hold off and subdue 2 IWA Chunin speaks highly of yourself and of the clan. Make sure to continue your efforts." "Of course, father," she replied, bowing her head. "Now, it is getting late. Head off to bed. I am still curious about this new technique you have claimed to develop and wish for a demonstration tomorrow. For now, you are dismissed." He turned back to his lingering paperwork, but was surprised when she didn't move. She seemed nervous and twiddled her thumbs together. "Is there something else you wish to discuss?" Actually, there is," she muttered. He gave her time to compose herself and gather her thoughts. She steeled herself as she said, "There is something I would like to share with you regarding the Hyuga clan ring." Hayashi was instantly alert. Due to Shikaku's suggestion, he had been preparing to have a talk with his daughter after she returned, but he was not expecting it to happen so soon. He was surprised she was the first one to make a move. "Go on. I believe I have discovered a story that might pertain to the stone ring. Where did this story come from, if I may ask?" She bit her lip and seemed to be having a fierce internal debate. It came from the stone room." It wasn't a complete lie. She had received the scroll in the room, just not from translating the stone. She was slightly relieved when she looked into her father's eyes and saw they were as sharp as they ever were. Her plan seemed to be working so far. "When did this happen?" "About when I was assigned to Team 7. His eyes flashed. "Why did you not bring this to my attention sooner?" "I just wanted to make you proud by figuring it out by myself." Hayashi was torn. The leader side of him was furious that she would keep something so important from him, and the father side of him was melting by her need to please him. It was just who she was. But there was something else. She was hiding something. Normally, he would chalk Hinata's nervous behavior to her shy personality, but he had been trained to notice when someone was holding something back. His own sensei had been a master at gathering information, and he had been sure to pass along his teachings to his students. The way she avoided eye contact more than normal. The way she hunched her shoulders. How she paused to think out her answer. They were all signs that she wasn't giving him the full truth. She was twisting it into a more believable story. As much as it vexed him, he would have to play along. He was simply grateful she had finally decided to come to him with this on her own. There were unknown factors at play here, and it was dangerous for her to undertake this on her own. "Why are you bringing this to my attention now?" "Because I need help. I've been hitting dead ends, and I believe it is time that I started reaching out to others. I can no longer do this alone." A smile fought to escape his lips. "While I am displeased that you kept this from me, I am proud that you came to me on your own accord. It speaks highly of one's character when they can admit that they cannot do everything by themselves." She blushed as she nodded her head. "Now, what discoveries have you made this time?" It felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I have discovered a story which could possibly point to the origin of the clan, but it seems to be just a fable. Most origin stories seem that way. Although the origin of Konoha can be traced back about 100 years, the battle between the village's founders is already revered as legend. As I have told you, our clan's history is one coded in prestige, but even we don't know the full origins of where our clan and Jujutsu originated. I am very interested to hear this fable of yours. If you will permit me, I can get you a full translation of the story and a copy of my research tomorrow morning. I accept your proposal. I will make sure to clean up my schedule. Meet me back here at 9 o'clock with all the research you have accumulated, and we shall discuss your findings. Thank you, father. She bowed as she began to stand up. She made her way to the door, when he called out to her, Hinata. She paused at the door to turn back to him. I am very pleased with your progress. Your mother would be very proud of the young woman you are becoming. Hinata's face lit up in a big smile, as her heart skipped a beat. She stuttered out a thank you as she rushed to her room to get ready. After she was gone, Hayashi unclenched the scroll he held in his hand. He had prepared it in case the mysterious genjutsu seemed to return again. She seemed to understand that there was something wrong as well. She was lying about where she got this story, but that did not mean he could dismiss it. She was trying to work around the illusion problem as well, he realized. As much as it pained him, she would have to face the bulk of this problem on her own. All he could do was try to lighten her load. Naruto had passed out the moment his head hit his pillow. He hadn't even bothered changing out of his torn and bloody new clothes. When he woke up the next morning, he was disappointed when he took off his new hoodie. The navy shirt was fine. It just needed a wash, but the short sleeve hood was torn across the front. He would have to spend some time knitting that back together. While it still seemed like a girly skill to him, he had been forced to learn it early on. With his limited budget, he was forced to repair the limited amount of clothes he had. He left a shadow clone to deal with this, as he pulled his casual white shirt over his head. He had 3 days all to himself and he was going to make the most of it. He really wanted to dig into his new advanced series books, but there was one thing he had to take care of. He said his goodbyes to the clone working in his house as he set out for the Hokage's office. It was time for his second major test. Even at these early hours, the Sandame was already fiercely at work. He sat across from Shikaku and Danzo as they scrolled over the mission report from the night before. What are your thoughts on this? He asked. Shikaku shook his head. Something doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense for them to sneak this far into our territory, just steal some business documents. That company has several branches that make more ideal targets closer to Iwa's borders. The Hokage nodded. This had troubled his as well. What also bothers me is the behavior of the two Chunin. The Sandame shot a look at his old friend who had been silent this entire time. And what are your thoughts on this? Danzo was quiet before he opened his eye. Let's examine the behavior of the members of their unit. First, the Zaofu clansman. I believe his actions are not an indication of Iwa's overarching mission. He poorly acted out of anger and threatened the safety of his teammates, just to settle a petty score. What we should focus on is what reactions he elicited from his comrades. From Hyuga-sama's report, the other Chunin seemed surprised when the Zaofu arrived. It begs the question, why would he be surprised by support after Hinata-sama had relinquished his possession of his supposed target and removed his ability to utilize ninjutsu? You're suggesting that the Chunin had another objective? Perhaps. I will admit, I am surprised that neither the Uchiha nor the Hyuga were their objectives. The Jounin seemed to recognize this fear when he lured Kakashi away. Shikaku chimed in. They must have realized it would have been more risky to chance stealing the genin than accomplishing their original mission. Which begs the question, the Sandame chimed, what was their original mission? Silence was his response as the other two men thought it over. Danzo, I want you to set aside some time to look into this. If your investigation means that you have to set foot in IWA territory, I will permit it. I want you to turn up something before that Tsuchikage responds to my letter. As you wish, Hiruzen, he nodded. Shikaku, make sure that the scouting department knows that I am displeased with their performance. Ensure that they fix up any holes in their sweeps. Understood, sir. Good. I want this issue resolved before the Chunin exams are underway. You are dismissed. After both men had left the room, Hiruzen began to light his pipe. Iwa's activity was concerning, especially as the exams were coming up. Their attention was already going to be pulled away due to all of the incoming villages. The last thing he needed was IWA getting confident, when they were busy dealing with logistical nightmare of the visiting traffic from other villages. He was about to return to his work, when his door burst open again. Naruto charged right in and gave him a mock salute when he reached his desk. How you doing, Gigi? The old man shot him a fake glare. Not well, no thanks to you. I'm figuring out how best to deal with your mess. Ah, come on, you don't mean that. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. In all seriousness, I do have a long day of work ahead of me. Is there something you needed? Yep, I'm ready to take the next test. Ah, so that was what this was about. He supposed this was an opportune time to do it. The boy had the next few days to himself, and he was sure the blonde would be too busy later, considering what Kakashi had in store for them. I see. Are you fully prepared? You know it. So what do you have planned for me this time? The Hokage chuckled. Very well. However, I'm not the one who has prepared your next test. I'm taking a page from an old project put forth by the Yondaime. Naruto's eyes lit up as the Sandaime pulled a scroll out from his desk. This was a test constructed by my predecessor for class project he created. This was meant to act as a final exam for the intermediary course. It is timed, I'm afraid, so make sure that you will not be disturbed when you start it. The blonde excitedly nodded as he was handed the scroll. I think it goes without saying that you should refrain from cheating. Just what kind of guy do you take me for? Someone who takes great pleasure in breaking the rules and causing trouble, said a voice from the corner of the room. You shut your mouth, Kitsune Baka. The blonde shouted. There was snickering from the corners of the room, as the ANBU watched the interaction between the boys. The Sandaime cleared his throat, catching the attention of everyone present. As I was saying, I wish you the best of luck. Now, I need to get back to work. You got it, Gigi. Thank you. And with that, the blonde stormed out of the office, just as quickly as he had came. 8 trigrams 64 palm guard. Hinata screamed as the training post was slashed apart by the sharp edges of chakra. Hayashi stood to the side of the courtyard as he watched Hinata's demonstration, and he had to admit he was impressed. Not many genin could claim that they had developed their own techniques. Thank you, Hinata. Come here, he called out as she jogged up to him. She was slightly panting when she arrived. He could tell with his Byakugan that the technique certainly ate up a large amount of her reserves. They would have to rectify this. I will admit I am impressed by the technique. I assume you got the idea by watching the Kaiten. She quickly nodded, yes sir, but I also got the idea from Mother's scrolls. It all clicked as the image of his wife bathed in a blue aura with thick, almost glass-like teal blades of chakra emanating from her palms popped into his mind. His wife had been as graceful as a swan when in public, but as ferocious as a tiger in the heat of battle. The comparison was especially appropriate considering her nickname. Very good. I assume you are aware of which of her jutsu are outside of your current limits. Another nod dissuaded his concerns. Although, this now made him curious. What other jutsu was his daughter trying to craft behind his back? Very good. Before I return to my office, there are a few things I would like to discuss with you. The first regards our talk from earlier this morning. 2 hours earlier, the two of them had sat down as Hinata read to him the story of the rabbit goddess and all of her research into determining the identity of this individual. He had been astounded how many books and scrolls she had burned through in her quest. She had not made much progress in determining the identity of the individual, but she had crossed off several possibilities from the long line of Hyuga lineage. For the time being, I would prefer it if you took a break from your research regarding the stone monument. She was surprised and started to protest, before he held up a hand. Don't get me wrong. I am very impressed by the progress you have made, but you have other matters that will require your attention. Your priority should first and foremost be to the safety of your teammates. To do this, you need to focus on your training, so that you will be able to properly support them. After his message from the Hokage, Hayashi was sure Kakashi had his own plans regarding how they would be spending their time. It would inhibit her from reaching her true potential if she had to split her limited free time between training and researching, especially when it tended to yield little results. Hinata was surprised by her father's words. She had assumed he would be more concerned about the secrets of the clan than her teammates. It was a different side of her father that she was not used to seeing. Do not be discouraged. I already have resources looking into this mystery, and I shall pass along your findings to them. You are no longer alone in this endeavor. Hinata was not shocked as her mind wandered to her conversation with the Nara leader a few days ago. For now, try to put your mind at ease. We will deal with this problem as it comes up. If the past is any indication, our insight into this problem will only come in random bursts at a time. It would be better to focus on something that guarantees results. Understood, sir? Good. Now, let's see if your technique can actually guard against its namesake. I will slow myself down so you are able to keep up. Are you ready? Hinata's face held a grim determination as she slipped into her form. Ready, very good. Then let us commence. Chapter 14, Downtime, Part 2. Naruto sat down at his kitchen table and sprawled his sealing kit all around the scroll. He was anxious to get started. What really excited him was that he had no idea what to expect. The idea of taking a test actually devised by his idol was exhilarating. With bated breath, he opened the scroll and burned through the only visible section. Naruto groaned as he combed over the instructions. Sadly, it was a formal test. His gut turned as he gazed at the first paragraph, which read, "For this exam, you will be tested for your mastery of the intermediary level of Fuinjutsu. Should you pass this exam, you will be permitted to move forward to the advanced classes. This exam is split into 4 parts, a multiple choice, fill in the blank, a free response, and a puzzle seal for you to solve. You will have 2 hours and 30 minutes from the moment you begin the exam. After the allotted time, security seals in the scroll will activate, preventing you from answering any further. If these seals are tampered with in any way, the scroll will lock and you will instantly fail. Any marks entered after the allotted time will not be counted. After the allotted time, you shall receive instant feedback for your grade. To begin the test, place your hand on the area below this paragraph and insert your chakra. This will act as your signature for grading later on. I am proud of all of you for getting this far, and I wish you the best of luck." Even though he knew the message wasn't directed at him, Naruto still felt his heart skip a beat from the encouragement. He wiped away a single tear that threatened to fall from his eye, and forced himself to concentrate. It was time to get serious. Picking up his brush, he placed his hand over the scroll and began pumping chakra into the paper. Immediately the scroll's contents were revealed and a timer began counting down at the top of the page. It was time to begin. It was about midday as Sasuke strolled along the canals of the village. He never really liked having a lot of free time. Even though he had disliked being forced to sit through the monotony of the academy, he had hated their summer breaks even more. All it did was give him more time to think, and whenever he started thinking, his thoughts would inevitably return to his brother. So he would drown himself in training to block out his thoughts and feelings. He couldn't reflect on his past if he was too tired to think. However, now he couldn't even do that. He tugged at the uncomfortable bandages on his shoulder. The nurse had been kind and very thorough when she inspected his injury. She wanted him to pass her compliments to Hinata for how well she had treated him up until this point. The nurse had bathed his shoulder in a strange green chakra, and a few minutes later, the injury was completely healed. Of course, that didn't stop her from wrapping him up in bandages to ensure that the newly formed tissue didn't tear. Something about it still being delicate. So now, he was left with nothing to do but simply walk and think. Desperately trying to avoid thoughts of his brother, he directed his train of thought to reflect on his last mission. All in all, he had to say that he was quite pleased his overall performance. Sure, he hadn't been able to let loose too much, but he finally had a comparison for where he placed among the shinobi of other villages. For a fresh genin, he had done very well, but even that was not good enough. It would never be good enough compared to him. Catching himself again, he shook his head and directed his thoughts towards the conclusion of the mission. To call what they had done brutal would have been an understatement. The more empathetic part of him actually hoped that the IWA meme did not feel the full effects of their combined attacks. The backwind of heat alone had actually left small blisters along his body. He could only imagine the full pain that the man had to endure. He was still shocked how well the two of them worked together. Though the blonde sometimes made his blood boil, Sasuke could not deny that the two of them had chemistry. No, not like that, he thought embarrassingly to himself. Even from when they were little, the two of them were easily able to read each other's minds. He remembered a particular incident from when the two of them were about 6. Naruto, being the rambunctious prankster he was, had been placed in detention for covering one of the boys from a civilian family head to toe in glitter. Of course, the boy had it coming, for he had been pelting the blonde boy from 2 rows above with spitballs for the past week. This was an interesting occasion, for Naruto wasn't alone in his punishment. He was also sharing detention with Sasuke, who sat 2 seats away from him. This was back before the Uchiha incident. His brother had hyped up the academy as this amazing place, but it honestly did nothing but bore him. The day before, Sasuke had decided to skip school in an attempt to follow his brother around the village. Needless to say, his mother and the teacher had not been pleased. So they both had to sit out recess and snack time, and they could only stare at the other children as they got to play outside. Not that it mattered to Naruto, since no one ever wanted to play with him. Their stomachs grumbled as the two boys jealously glared at their classmates. Their teacher was sitting at his desk filing some paperwork, when one of his colleagues poked his head in. The man had given the two a short glare, promising a world of pain if they moved. He took his bento box and placed it up in the highest cubby before walking out of the door. As soon as they heard their footsteps disappear, the two sprung up as one and moved to the cubbies. Without a word, Sasuke crossed his hands and gave Naruto a boost as he desperately tried to reach for their teacher's box. Naruto stretched his tiny fingers, until he finally grasped the side of the container. His face lit up into his iconic smile as he clambered down and the boys rummaged through the box. When the teacher returned, he was happy to find the two boys sitting upright in their seats as if they hadn't moved. He grabbed his bento box and was about to get back to work. He reached for the dango sticks he had been saving, but was surprised when he found them absent. He glared at the two boys who desperately tried to hide their guilt, but they could not remove the crumbs that littered the sides of their mouths. The two of them worked in tandem a little too well for how much they, at times, despised one another. It was like they had some unspoken connection or long past that enabled them to act in tandem without thinking. It was something that always bothered him about the blonde. No matter how much he sometimes pushed him away, they seemed to be linked together. As his thoughts returned to the battle, an offhand comment from the IWA shinobi made him pause. "Stop getting in my way, Uchiha. You can't stop me from getting the yondaime brat." What had he meant by that exactly? Sure, Naruto had Fuinjutsu in common with the yondaime, but he wouldn't call that enough to label him that way. This thought made him stop. Actually, how did the IWA shinobi even know he was good at Fuinjutsu? Before he started chasing them back towards Hinata's fight, Naruto had not even demonstrated that he was good with seals. Had they been spying on them? Maybe, but certainly not that man, he reasoned. The metal man had seized up and charged the blonde the instant he saw him. If he had been the one spying on him before, he would have jumped him then. What was it about Naruto screamed a connection between him and the yondaime? Sasuke stooped along the river and gazed up at the looming stone head of the man in question. He could kind of see a resemblance. They both certainly had the spiky hair. From the few pictures he had seen of the man, he guessed they had similar hair color. Those were a few connections, but Sasuke scoffed as he thought at the more abundant differences. While he was sure some details were embellished, he reflected on how the villagers would describe their fallen hero. A man who was a genius above all others, but never flaunted it. Extremely humble and patient. A man who always kept a level head. Shit, 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 shit. Naruto muttered as he glanced at the clock. Sasuke scoffed as he thought of his teammate. The blonde was clever, but he was about as impatient as they come. So what could? "Hey, what are you doing down there?" Sasuke was cut out of his musings, and looked up to see a young girl staring down at him. She seemed to be around his age. He didn't recognize her from the academy, so he assumed she was a civilian. She had long black hair and black eyes that mirrored his own, except hers held a different emotion. She was carrying a bag of groceries in her hands, and held a distinct look of irritation as she glared at him. "You heard me, Baka. What are you doing down there? The adults around here don't want us walking next to the water." Sasuke scoffed and glared back at her. "Trust me. I'm fine. I'm the last person you need to worry about getting hurt," says the guy with his arm bandaged up. She shot back, "And who said I was worried about you getting hurt?" He clenched his teeth as he rebutted, "You seem to worry enough about me falling in." "It's not about falling in, dumbass. It's about the water moccasins that inhabit the area. Like that one right you're about to step on." Sure enough, Sasuke looked down and uncharacteristically let out a yelp as he jumped back from the black and yellow snake that sat coiled in front of him. She had giggled for a second before her eyes slightly widened as he flipped several feet in the air and landed close to her. "So you're a shinobi. So what if I am?" he asked, noticing the disdain in her voice. "Nothing," she seemed to shrug. "So much for the ever-vigilant shinobi who are supposed to protect us. You guys can't even protect yourselves." Sasuke wanted to protest, but she did have him stuck here. It would have been disastrous if he had stepped on the serpent. If it had bitten him, he didn't know if he would have been able to make it back to the hospital in time. So he grit his teeth and mumbled something under his breath. "Didn't quite catch that." "I said, a little louder, duck butt." He sent her a glare as he clenched out, "Thank you." She sent him a smirk. "Don't mention it." Well, I have to go, ninja boy. In case you didn't know, the world doesn't always revolve around you guys. I have a brother to feed. The name is Ria, by the way. What's yours, duck butt? He ignored her comment about his hair as he said, Sasuke. Pleasure. Well, goodbye, Sasuke. Try to keep yourself out of trouble. With that, she turned around and started to continue her way upriver as if they had never talked. Sasuke glared at her retreating form for a while before he turned his attention back to the black snake, which seemed to be staring right at him. It hissed at him and he responded by using his good arm to chuck a kunai at it. It moved its head just out of the way before turning and heading into the water. Snakes always gave Sasuke chills. With one last glance before it dived back into the water, Sasuke tucked his hands in his pockets and began walking into the village. It was getting around time to grab dinner. Naruto was sweating. He desperately tried to shut out each tick of the clock that counted down to his deadline. Shit, everything had started out well enough. He had flashed through the first parts of the exam without a problem, no pun intended, but now he was surprised that he was actually being challenged by the puzzle seal. A required trait for all Fuinjutsu users was being able to discern the hidden code within each individual or set of kanji. Some seals operated on specific letters alone, while others required multiple letters to work in conjunction. Some even required lines of kanji that stretched out for several feet to achieve their intended purpose. Of course, this was very impractical for several cases, so a method was developed to reduce the size of these segments. Sprawling branches of kanji could be compacted into smaller and more manageable shapes and sizes. It was like condensing a paragraph into a single word or two. In fact, that had been one of the problems he had faced as he was unraveling the Hiration. Before he had been introduced to the idea, he had struggled to understand that the symbols of endurance, love, and sword each held their own sprawling library of code. Back to his test, revealing these branches wasn't the issue. Reading the damn thing was what truly plagued him. Naruto was struggling with a puzzle that was constantly contorting and shifting across the page. The ink seemed to have a life of its own as it sprung across the page and shifted into a variety of shapes. Whenever Naruto tried to enlarge a specific line of the seal's formula, it would be covered or contorted so that he could not read it. The yandere must have been a really sadistic bastard if he thought this was funny. He was fighting against the clock now and he knew it. When the seal had started shifting, he had panicked and had been unable to regain his composure. As time continued to run out, he only panicked even harder. He had no idea what the seal did, let alone what he was supposed to do. There were no instructions when he reached this part. All there had been was a large black circle of ink that morphed into a decagon upon his touch. Each angle spat out a different line of code and began spinning clockwise. When he reached out to touch one, it branched out into numerous links that contorted into unreadable squiggles. It made his head spin. What was the yandere expecting him to do? He closed his eyes and clutched his face. This wasn't working. He needed to try something else. He was going to fail otherwise. He needed. A strange calm washed over him, as a word of advice seemed to creep into his mind. Whenever you find yourself facing a problem and under great stress, take a moment to step away. Take a deep breath, and look at the problem a different way. Naruto let out a deep breath and closed his eyes. His finally started to slow down as he began to slowly inhale and exhale. I can do this. I just need to be calm. As his heartbeat settled down, his mind retraced his steps to the beginning. When he had reached this section, he had immediately pounced on the large blob in the center. It was at the forefront and designed to grab your attention. If activated, it would intentionally spiral out and try to confuse the reader. There was no way the yandere actually expected them to be able to read through this hot mess. It just wasn't possible. There had to be something else. He let out the breath he'd been holding and slammed his hands onto the scroll. He clenched his fingers as he twisted his hands counterclockwise. Immediately, the scroll began spinning in the opposite direction and began curling back into its original shape, until the singular, black circle returned to the page. Naruto leaned back as he studied the blot. He let his eyes wander the page, soaking in every detail until he noticed 4 black dots along the edge of the paper. Each of them was about the size of the tip of a pencil. He had totally missed them during his first attempt, and then it hit him. It was a message that had been drilled into his head by every book he had ever read about Fuinjutsu. Whenever faced with a new seal, always take your time to study it by parts and always work from the outside in. He pressed his fingers on the top 2 dots and spread them across the page, revealing a new line of code that did not twist like the others before it. He did the same to the bottom too and made a square made of kanji around the circle. He slowly read over the instructions and slapped himself in the head. It was so simple. Picking up his brush, he reactivated the circle, causing the branches to spread across the page, leaving an empty space right in the middle of the page. This time, the branches did not wiggle or contort on the paper. Instead, they drew straight lines to the corners of the square. Every branch contained the same question repeated over and over again. Smiling, he began writing his response in the center of the paper. The timer ticked down its final seconds as he finished his final stroke. It asked, "What is most important when tackling a new problem?" Naruto chuckled as he formed the hand signs to lace the kanji with chakra. He really had to thank Kitsune for his advice. In the middle of page were only 2 kanji, which read, patience. The scroll glowed bright red as the timer stopped at 0. A second later, the whole scroll glowed white and Naruto could no longer see the page. A green light began descending from the tip of the scroll all the way towards the end. When it reached the bottom, the glowing light vanished, revealing green check marks next to all of his answers. He chuckled as he stared at a small lollipop that had appeared at the top of the page next to his grade. He picked it up and rolled it around in his hands before opening the wrapper. Time flowed differently for things in seals. It could be designed to be dramatically faster, but usually time crept almost to a halt inside of seals. The piece of candy had been sitting there for who know how many years, but it was probably in the same condition the yondaime bought it in. Naruto popped the candy in his mouth and couldn't suppress the warm feeling of giddiness that spread across his chest. He had passed with flying colors. The next few days seemed to fly by, and before they knew it, the members of Team 7 found themselves walking together towards their training grounds. Naruto had been sure to boast that he had officially moved on to the advanced Fuinjutsu material. Hinata happily applauded his accomplishment, while Sasuke simply told him good job. They were shocked when they found their sensei leaning against the side of the bridge, with his book suspiciously absent. "Why, you're actually on time," Naruto stuttered. Yes, I suppose I am. What's going on, sensei?" Hinata asked cautiously. He sighed as he gazed over the 3 of them. "I would like to offer you all an apology." He could literally see the confusion etch itself on their faces. "I will admit that my behavior has been a little lax when it comes to your training, and for that I apologize. Despite that, you 3 were able to overcome a major obstacle all on your own, and for that you should be commended." They were quickly cut off from smiling when he said, "Don't let that go to your head. In fact, even though you repelled those Chunin, you all would be dead if I hadn't shown to deal with their Jounin leader. Whether I like it or not, you 3 are going to be facing some big challenges in your futures, and you will need to be ready for them." So, I had a conversation with the Hokage. They each stared at him in curiosity. "For the next month, you 3 are mine. We will not be going on any missions for the time being." Naruto began cheering and jumping up and down before Kakashi cut him off. "This does not mean things are going to be easy for you. In case you didn't know, I was the captain of ANBU for a reason. For the next month, I am going to train you until your knuckles bleed, your insides will burn, and you will feel as if you are going to collapse. You do what I tell you to do, and only leave when I tell you to leave. If you manage to succeed in the goals I put out for you, Hokage-sama will assign us several C-rank missions to make up for the D ranks we will have missed, and that is not all." Sasuke had been shocked. This was exactly what he had hoped for, but apparently there was more. "In case you didn't know, the Chunin exams are coming up relatively soon. If we are to do this, the Hokage doesn't just expect you 3 to enter, he expects you to pass. He is breaking protocol here by allowing us to do this, so he expects results. Now are you 3 up to it?" Sasuke grinned as he looked between his teammates. Naruto shared his grin and Hinata had a look of grim determination. "Do you even need to ask?" Naruto asked. "Good. Now then." Kakashi rushed forward faster than they could blink and drove his fist into Naruto's gut. His eyes bulged out of his head as he was flung several feet away. Kakashi stared down at the faces of his shocked students and said, "Training begins now." That's it for part 3. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.